Okay? Video 4, the Acts of Paul and Thecla. This is part 4, second chapter still. While Paul was preached this sermon in the church, which was in the house of Onesiphorus, a certain virgin named Thecla, whose mother name was Thecla, and who was betrothed to a man named Thamaris, sat at a certain window in her house, from whence by the advantage of a window in the house where Paul was, she both night and day heard Paul's sermons concerning Elohim, concerning charity, concerning faith in Hamashiach Christ, and concerning prayer. Nor would she depart from the window till with exceeding joy she was subdued to the doctrines of faith. Okay, so she never left until he was done preaching. She was glued to the window listening. At length, when she saw many women and virgins going into Paul, she earnestly desired that she might be thought worthy to appear in his presence and hear the word of Christ, for she had not yet seen Paul's person, but only heard his sermons, and that alone. But when she would not be prevailed upon to depart from the window, her mother sent to Thamaris, who came with the greatest pleasure, as hoping now to marry her. Accordingly, he said, Thecla, where is my Thecla? Thecla replied, Thamaris, I have something very strange to tell you. For Thecla, for the space of 3 days, will not move from the window, not so much as to eat or drink, but is so intent in hearing the artful and delusive discourses of a certain foreigner. So to them, Paul was a foreigner. So they was not of the same race. They was not of the same kind. That I perfectly admire Thamaris, that a young woman of her no modesty will suffer herself to be so prevailed upon. For that man has disturbed the whole city at Iconium. This is Paul. And even your Thecla, among others, all the women and young men flocked to him to receive his doctrine. So Paul was in a foreign land, a foreign country, which is in the New Testament, which is where Christ told everybody to go out, his man, to go preach into the Gentile section. Okay? Go out amongst the Gentiles and preach the word. So this is where Paul was. Who besides all the rest tells them that there is but one Elohim, who alone is to be worshipped, and that we ought to live in chastity. Notwithstanding this, my daughter Thecla, like a spider's web, fastened to the window, is captivated by the discourses of Paul. She didn't eat, sleep, she fasted anytime he spoke, and attends upon them with prodigious eagerness and vast delight. And thus by attending on what he says, the young woman is seduced. Now then do you go and speak to her, for she is betrothed to you. Accordingly, Thamaris went, and having saluted her, and taken care not to surprise her, he said, Thecla, my spouse, why sittest thou in the melancholy posture? What strange impressions are made upon thee? Turn to Thamaris and blush. Thamaris was of her kind and had enmity between Paul. So he's telling her to turn to her and acknowledge him. Her mother also spake to her after the same manner and said, Child, why doest thou sit so melancholy and like one astonished? Makest no reply? Then they wept exceedingly, Thecla, that he had lost his spouse, Thecla, that she had lost her daughter, and the maids that they had lost their mistress, and there was a universal mourning in the family. But all these things made no impression upon Thecla, so as to incline her so much as to turn to them and take notice of them, for she still regarded the discourses of Paul. So she wasn't paying attention to Thamaris, who her people wanted her to marry and be with. She didn't care nothing about Thamaris. She wanted Paul, an Israelite, a foreigner. Then Thamaris ran forth into the street to observe who they were, who went into Paul and who came out from amongst him. Thamaris ran forth into the street to observe who they were who went into Paul and came out from him. And he saw two men engaged in a very warm dispute, and said to them, Sirs, what business have you here? So he interrupted, And who is that man within, belonging to you, who deludes the minds of men, both young men and virgins, persuading them that they ought not to marry, but continue as they are? I promise to give you a considerable sum, if you will give me a just account of him, for I am the chief person of this city. So Thamaris was the chief of the city. Demas and Hermogenes replied, We cannot so exactly tell who he is, but this we know, that he deprives young men of their intended wives, and virgins of their intended husbands, by teaching there can be no future resurrection, unless ye continue in chastity, and do not defile your flesh. So Paul was speaking the words of the Lord. That's what he was doing. Then said Thamaris, Come along with me to my house and refresh yourselves. So they went to a very splendid entertainment, where there was wine in abundance and very rich provisions. They were brought to a table richly spread and made to drink plentifully by Thamaris, on account of the love he had for Thecla and his desire to marry her. Then Thamaris said, I desire ye would inform me what doctrines of this Paul are, that I may understand them.